difference between playing at altitude and playing at sea level. The Broncos were concerned about it, but I know that teams have approached it where you come in and keep the air that's in your body because it's changing.
Really?
That if you come in as late as possible, you are still playing with your corpuscles and the air that's in. You're looking at me funny, but
you did more homework on it than let's bring in an expert right now.
Okay.
Let's bring in Dr. Benjamin Herigman to talk about this. How altitude does affect primarily athletes who come into town for a quick 1 or 2 day trip. Dr. Herigman, thank you for joining us. And I'm wondering, how long does it actually take a body to adapt to the altitude? Can an athlete adapt in 24 or 48 hours?
Well, I think you have to first ask the question about what the altitude is. Denver's altitude is not very high when it comes to athletic performance degradation or changes. If we're talking about Leadville or Summit County, I think then we're talking about several days for acute adjustment, and then it takes up to several weeks to even months for more permanent adjustment. But for a highly tuned athlete to come into Denver and to play here, it really doesn't take very long for that athlete to adjust to the 5,280 feet.
Yes, doctor, but I would ask you, we're talking about the physical makeup of a body. Psychologically, what kind of effect it has, because the teams here all say, welcome to a mile high, you're at 5280, they hear about altitude, it does have some effect on them, and it affects the curveball here at altitude, it affects the distance that footballs travel.
Baseball's
psychologically, how do you think that affects somebody, or can they deal with it?
Well, I do think you bring up a valid point. I think that any kind of a psychologic impediment or enhancement will affect various people in various ways. And you know, what did Yogi Berra say, that athletics is 90% physical and 50% mental, or something to that effect?
Yeah, he said 90% physical.
Baseball is 90%,
and the other half.
Yeah. And the other half, right? The other
mental.
half is mental.
Yeah.
So, but you see it all the time in athletics, where the mental part of it really takes over in terms of the athletic performance. So if you can make a good psychological argument and athletes buy into it, I guess you have a little bit of advantage that way. But if we're looking at football, for example, those are spurt sports. In other words, they're running for short distances and then they stop. Those kinds of athletic activities really don't have, the altitude in Denver doesn't have much of an impact. If you're looking for longer term athletic performances like running, then I think you do have some performance issues.
Dr. Herigman, if you were in charge of these teams that were coming in for a game for one night or for 3 nights in baseball, what would you tell your athletes to do?
Nothing different.
Really? Even hydrate?
Well, the hydration piece is a different question. I thought you were talking about the oxygen and the effect of oxygen.
I was talking basically about everything.
Yeah, so hydration is a big issue, and we've suggested to the Colorado Rockies that hydration is really one of the issues that they have to pay attention to when they go back and forth between sea level and altitude. That when you go to sea level, for example, from altitude, you have a tendency to retain a little bit more water. And so when in these finely tuned athletes, even the seconds that it takes for a ball to come into a batter, even if you're off by a millisecond, that could make a difference between a ground ball and a hit. So I think that there's a whole array of things that people have to pay attention to. Hydration is a big issue. Sleep is another very important issue. If people that are playing at higher elevation, even in Colorado Springs, have found that sleep is not as easy to attain once you come from sea level up to the 6,000 to 6,500 feet in the spring. and it may even have some impact in Denver in some people.
That sounds like your weekend, sleeping and drinking.
But you said, you said that spurt sports. I tend to think of baseball and football as spurt sports, but I think of basketball and hockey as all-out drive, constant movement sports. Do you think there's a difference in those relationships at altitude? Or you mentioned Vail and Summit County. I was thinking about the skiers, but they tend to ski at high altitudes no matter where they are in the world. But is there then more of a disadvantage for hockey and basketball teams because they're not really spurt sports? They're movement all the time sports. Making any sense?
Yes. And I do think that there is some minor disadvantage. But, you're dealing with a really highly tuned athlete. And it's always been my opinion that talent makes much more difference than altitude adjustment.
Okay, because when the Olympics were in Mexico City, and neither you or Les are old enough to remember, but I remember all the records that were broken in Mexico City, and its altitude, I think, is similar to Denver's. But for training for the Olympics, then all these athletes come to the United States Olympic training facilities in Colorado Springs, thinking that's going to give them an advantage at sea level. Based on what you're telling me, maybe it doesn't make as much a physical advantage for them as it would maybe a psychological advantage. I've trained at altitude. I'm going to sea level.
No, I think we have to be careful here. So if you're training at a place like Boulder or Colorado Springs at the Olympic Training Center, and then you're performing at sea level, I think there is an enhancement and an advantage for at least a short period of time. We don't know exactly what that period of time is, but we do think that training at higher elevations and performing at lower elevations is advantageous. This is, the analogy is what Lance Armstrong and others used to do in terms of blood doping. What we're doing at higher elevations is we're increasing our hemoglobin or red blood cells, and those are the cells that carry oxygen. So if you have more of them because you've trained at higher elevation and then you perform at sea level, there should, in fact, be a theoretical advantage.
Dr. Honigman, we really appreciate your time, and I assume people can get a hold of you if they need at the Altitude Medical Clinic, correct?
That's right. We're at the University Hospital, and we're happy to deal with mostly people who come to live in Colorado or travel to Colorado and believe they have altitude adjustment issues.
Dr. Honigman, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
All right. Dr. Benjamin Honigman. That's something sponsored by John Elway Cadillac of Park Meadows, Colorado's #1 Cadillac dealer.